Your backend system that you use, if you have a wholesale arm of your business, do not underestimate that. It will screw you. What they're not telling you is it's a big ass system that can do everything you need it to do. Once you customize it to do what you need it to do, you're gonna get $100,000 bill. Square peg, round hole, no thanks. Alrighty guys, welcome to my first solo episode of Ops Unfiltered. I'm Jared. I'm the founder and CEO of Luminous. Luminous is inventory and supply chain for the modern e-commerce company. Today, I wanted to, for our first solo episode where you get to hear the ramblings of a madman, I wanted to dive into a topic that I'm very familiar with, which is ERPs and backend systems. So the state of the market, the state of the union. Who is this podcast for? Like, who is this helpful for? Yeah, I'm kind of just rambling on what Luminous is doing and why I started it, who we serve. My hope for this episode is an e-commerce operator or founder can see themselves in my story and get some value out of why they feel how they feel when it comes to operating their business. Why did I start Luminous? Well, I started Luminous because I saw a massive gap in the market and I experienced what that gap meant for e-commerce operators and founders. So I actually came from a sourcing supply chain background. So I ran a sourcing division for madeinchina.com. And I would find e-commerce companies who had trouble setting up their supply chain, and they were my clients. So I would take on their purchasing, their factory setup, contract negotiation. I tried to save them money. I tried to, move them from China to Vietnam, just back-end sourcing services, if you will. So I started getting exposed to the problem at depth while I was sourcing for all these different companies. And I was exposed to a lot of different points in the e-commerce ecosystem. So I worked with Amazon sellers. I worked with 3PLs. I worked with brands that were super simple. They would just replenish to a 3PL and maybe replenish Amazon FBA. They didn't do their own fulfillment in-house. I met with platform sellers and I helped source clothing for them. For example, like Jane.com, a couple of their sellers I helped source for them. I sourced for complex brands that did in-house fulfillment and sold on a wide variety of channels. That's when I started to notice, first off, that there was a gap. So after meeting with all these different sellers, and again, since I was handling the sourcing and procurement, so for example, I'm working with a company that sources, they need me to source cans for their drink. Okay, well, the conversation would typically go something like this. All right, do you have any current quotes for your cans? What have your purchases been so far? How many units are you going to move this Q4? What's your current lead times? So basic questions for forecasting. Or really just planning the demand of your product so that I can have an idea of what quantities are we dealing with. What was wild to me was every single one of the companies that I worked with, none of them could produce a forecast. And if they did, or if I just asked them for basic things like, how much did you purchase last? It's the same thing. They'd go through their email and search their emails to find this purchase order or really a pro forma invoice from the factory. They weren't even keeping track of the purchases themselves. I'm sure it was logged somewhere in QuickBooks as a bill, but really their accountants just worried about that. When it came to anything, inventory, ops, forecasting, it was a black hole. None of these brands could actually forecast for me. And I always found that so alarming because, I was dealing with, anywhere from $3 million to $50 million a year brands or companies. And some of them were doing serious volume. And that's when I noticed, I was like, because in your mind, a lot of times you think, okay, $15 million a year business. They've got to have a system. If I ask them, how many units are you going to pull in Q4? They have to be referencing like, some module in SAP or NetSuite or like, any ERP or any system where it's just super dialed. Like, yes, this SKU, we're going to move this much. We have this much on order right here. We run a quick report. This is how many we bought in 2022. That wasn't the case. So that was the first time my expectations were shattered of, okay, any brand company doing like $3 to $50 million a year, it does not mean that they have a legitimate back-end system for their business to reference everything, literally reference everything. How many units did I purchase? What are my forecasts to sell through? How many are in the warehouse right now? How many are at FBA? E-commerce companies, the vast majority of them don't have a system in place for that. So I found that perplexing. That's where I started to understand that, okay, there's a gap here. I don't fully understand it. I just know that there's a gap. And I kind of just kept operating that business for a while. The sourcing business. I would just help clients source their stuff. I would come up with my own forecast a lot of times. Made some really good connections there, people that I stay in touch with to this day. I eventually moved on from that sourcing division to a company called Qualtree. So Qualtree is a local Utah company. Qualtree was one of my clients that I had sourced for. So I had helped them find better pricing with cutting boards, with miscellaneous things. They sold a lot of products. So I went to Qualtree, and it was part of my first proposition to them where I was starting Luminous. And so I came to Qualtree and I told the CEO, I interviewed with him. They already knew me. They already knew that I could save them a lot of money just through my sourcing and manufacturing connections. I'd already demonstrated that before. And so I went to them and I was like, hey, I'm done with this phase of my life. I'm ready to move on to my next one. My next one it's Luminous. And so the proposition was like, hey, just bring me on as your director of supply chain. Let me source for you guys full time. I'm going to save you guys so much money. Get things super dialed. Because at that time, they didn't have anybody like really focused, like any executive focused on that pillar of the business. That's where I first started building Luminous. And it was from the perspective of a modern multi-channel e-commerce company. So that kind of lays the groundwork for how Luminous was built. That right there is why we're different than most companies. So most backend systems or software that get built, they get built by engineers. They're familiar with the problem, but they're not close to it. Or like, for example, there's a lot of systems out there that were built by engineers first who, they built a backend system because, they worked with a 3PL or they worked with a manufacturer and they had to build like custom modules and like, I could resell this to e-commerce companies. Or there's so many stories out there of like somebody who fundraises and, they're a purchaser or demand planner for a big company, like a Fortune 500 company. And they built out these amazing models and, that's the backbone of their forecasting tool that they build, and they go down market and sell e-commerce. Luminous was built out of the trenches of modern multi-channel e-commerce. Qualtree was probably the most complex company that you could dream up to build a solution around. So Qualtree, we sold across like 10 different channels. We had a wholesale arm of our business. So I break down complexity in different pillars. Number one is your channel mix. What is your channel mix? Okay, so we sold across like 10 different channels. So a bunch of different platforms. We had multiple Etsy accounts, multiple Amazon accounts, multiple Shopify stores, and we had a wholesale arm of our business, multiple platforms like Groupon as well, Jane.com, and again, wholesale, that is an underestimated arm of the business that drives so much complexity for e-commerce companies. That's a crucial one. And your backend system that you use, if you have a wholesale arm of your business, Do not underestimate that. It will screw you because so many of these systems don't account for wholesale, or at least the way modern specialty wholesale is done. And I'll dive into that a little bit. But that was our channel mix. The next pillar is fulfillment and warehouse ops. So do you have a warehouse that you operate? The third thing is your purchasing and manufacturing. So are you purchasing raw components that get manufactured into a finished good? So for Qualtry, yes. And not only were we purchasing raw units that are being manufactured into a finished good, we were a personalization company. We were a personalization brand. We'd really aggregate a bunch of different brands and channels, and we were the manufacturing and the fulfillment that was driving that. So it was so unbelievably complex. The company that, Luminous was built for, a $15 million a year e-com brand that sold across 10 different channels, had a wholesale arm, purchased raw goods. Every single one of them went through a manufacturing process of personalization that was sent direct to the consumer. And on top of that, forecasting, reporting, all that, like we bought from overseas suppliers. Raw materials got consumed and shipped out to the finished customer. So raw materials got consumed by our machines, and then they got shipped out to the final customer. So that was where Luminous started. We started in the trenches of Qualtry, and I think that's shown in the product. Another part of the modern e-commerce company is it's not just, okay, do you check these boxes, right? Do you sell across multiple channels? Do you have a wholesale arm? Do you do in-house fulfillment? Do you purchase raw goods that you have to demand plan? Sure, there's those check boxes, but the most important checkbox for modern e-commerce is, are you having like 2 or 3 people manage all of that? And if the answer is yes, then welcome to modern e-commerce. It's like, we handle every single point of the supply chain, every single complexity from a wholesaler or distributor, importer, or a retailer. We handle all of that complexity. Oh, and by the way, we run super lean, so we do all of that shit with 2 to 3 operators. That was Qualtry. The person managing all of that, there was somebody who's managing purchasing and sourcing, just one person for, over, I would say like $3-4 million of purchasing. There was one main person, the COO, who was managing the entire warehouse and all the operations that went into that, receiving, manufacturing, shipping out. And then there was one person managing all the wholesale side of the business. So all of these things are super complicated, and they require a certain breadth of features to even, for a system to even be considered by Qualtry or a modern e-commerce business. You have to have a certain breadth of features. And on top of that, it needs to, and this is where a lot of operators miss on their tech decisions, it has to be built to be operated with one person, worst case scenario. Like one person needs to be able to run all those functions that I just said and have the ability to scale up into, like, sure, one day you could have a whole purchasing team on Luminous, but more often than not, tools can almost always be ran with like 5, 10, 15, 20 people. The important question for e-commerce is, can I do all of these functions with like one person? The answer to that is normally no. That's what started this systems issue at Qualtry. And that's what really sparked this conversation of, okay, what is Luminous? What are we going to do? How are we different than other systems? And as I really took that opportunity to research as many systems as possible. And that's where I came into contact with big ERPs, NetSuite, Acumatica, Dynamics 365, more lower down market tools, point solutions that do one thing pretty well. And yes, it was built for like an e-commerce company with not many people, things like SKU Vault, finale inventory. There's literally hundreds of down-market inventory tools. And so what I noticed was it was kind of a common theme. When I was going through and demoing every single one of these systems. So first off, with the big ERPs, they can solve all of your problems. They can do everything. I mean, these tools have been being built for decades. NetSuite can technically do everything. The problem, though, is NetSuite, Acumatica, Dynamics 365, Sage. These were built for teams that have a purchasing procedure like something like this. Okay, so I have a whole module dedicated to demand planning. Okay, so I have a whole team who their task is to keep the demand planning module in NetSuite accurate, so that my purchasers can go and write purchase orders. And that's going to be like a 5-10 step process, writing one purchase order, splitting shipments, keeping track of COGS, having a totally different contracts team, like a team that puts the contracts, attaches it to the purchase order, and it goes through a million different approval processes. NetSuite, Acumatica, Dynamics 365, all of these big ERPs were built for massive teams. And if you're a team that has one purchaser, it's not a good fit. And NetSuite will tell you, like, no, we have other clients who, they just have a one-person purchasing team, and NetSuite's a great fit for them. How? If a small e-commerce company uses NetSuite and they say they're happy, there's one of two things happening. One is just a general tolerance. Like, my purchase process is 15 steps long. It's ridiculous. I'm just tolerating it. Like, it takes way too long. I spent way too much money on this implementation. Therefore, I'm not even going to look at other solutions. There's just like this general tolerance because you're just handcuffed. You're like, I spent so much. I'm locked into a contract. Like, it's not even worthwhile for me to complain. Even if I do complain, NetSuite's not going to listen. They're massive. Why are they going to listen to Joe Schmo purchaser over here? Okay, so like I said, either you are just tolerating the complexity just because you've paid so much money, you're in too deep, and you're locked in the contract, so you can't really do anything about it. That's one quote unquote happy customer on NetSuite. People who are just tolerating the 15-step receiving process, the 20-step fulfillment process, or they customized it. So in NetSuite and big ERPs, you can customize your flow. You can take that big, massive purchasing process and simplify it down to a couple steps, but it costs a lot of money. And that's where so many people are like, they just don't get it. Where, yes, NetSuite or Acumatica, they can come and quote you like a base price of $3,000 a month. But what they're not telling you is it's a big ass system that can do everything you need it to do. But once you customize it to do what you need it to do, you're going to get $100,000 bill or more. This is what turned me off to the big ERPs. First off, obviously the cost. It's made for massive companies. I think all of that would be fine if NetSuite was building towards mid-market e-commerce. They're not. Their client concentration is not that. NetSuite had a broad tool. They have multi-million-dollar year contracts with massive companies. That's where they're going to focus. Why would they focus on mid-market? They went down market as an experiment to see if they could sell e-commerce companies. And simply because mid-market e-commerce has nobody that's actually solving this problem effectively, they had success. But you're starting to hear NetSuite horror stories now from when they went down market, sold people. And the fundamental issue is NetSuite's roadmap, their ethos. It's not for mid-market. It's not for these e-commerce companies from, $1 million to $100 million a year in revenue. They truly are built, structured, and purposed as a company for massive, massive companies, multi-billion-dollar companies or or 9-figure brands. That's not most of e-commerce. Most of e-commerce, even if you're $50 million a year, even if you're $100 million a year brand, you don't have massive teams. You have, most of the time, even with a $100 million brand, you have less than 50 employees. So that was the biggest issue at Qualtry when I was looking at the big players, the big ERPs. I noticed that really fast. I was like, square peg, round hole, no thanks. On top of that, I went and talked to a bunch of people that implement NetSuite. That's an interesting experiment right there. Not a single person who's implemented NetSuite in e-commerce, a down market e-commerce company has said, you know what? It was really smooth, went really well. We loved it. Not us, you will never hear those words uttered. In fact, I can confidently tell you, anybody who's implemented a big ERP at a small e-commerce company, they say the same things. It sucked. The general thing that gets said is, it sucked, super expensive, way more expensive than I thought. Like, oh, well, then why don't you change? Well, we're kind of stuck. We're stuck in a contract. Or we've already invested so much into it. There's nothing really more that I can do. My hands are tied. I've never heard anything different than that, ever. So I think that's a good summary of big ERPs for e-commerce, and the conclusions that I drew after demoing and after researching and talking to so many people who had gone that path. Okay, so now more down market tools. Okay, so what's like down market tools? What I mean by that is, okay, at that time we're on ShipStation, Google Sheets, QuickBooks, and sure, like Asana, like other project management tools. But so the down market route is basically implementing an inventory tool or an ops tool that, like, it can do some of the things you need it to do, but not everything. We actually ended up going that route first. Actually implement SKU Vault. I'm using this tool to supplement my inventory and warehouse operations. It costs between $100 and $2,000 a month. And it can do most of the things or some of the things that I need to do, but not everything. And by the way, it doesn't really integrate with everything very well. It's not super customizable, but like, it'll at least keep track of inventory. So we went that route. And it was simply cost. It was NetSuite quoting us at $100,000 minimum implementation, between $5,000 and $7,000 a month all in. So a lot of money. And at that time, like, there's just we couldn't have afforded that because there was too much downside with that path. Like, if it didn't work, then we were screwed. Like, and we would have had to dump more money in, and we would be stuck in a contract. Just a horrible prognosis for any e-commerce company in our situation. So we ended up going the down market route after I demoed a bunch of tools like Sin7, Finale, SKU Vault, Skubana. I ended up going with SKU Vault. The cost was around like $1,500, $2,000, I think, all in, after like all of our seats, after exercising all the seats that we had. So why did we choose SKU Vault? Well, again, going back to our attributes real fast. Qualtry, we were on ShipStation, Google Sheets, QuickBooks, super complicated, sold across like 10 different channels, warehouse operations, light manufacturing, the whole shebang. So SKU Vault seemed like a basic inventory tool that would do the job. Seemed like they could handle kits and bundles, which we had a lot of. It seemed like they had pretty decent auto depletion that could just hook up with ShipStation. It felt like, okay, this is a tool that we can just dip our toe in the water and it will like serve us and give us some value. That ended up being very wrong. And with a company with the attributes like Qualtry, there's so many considerations that you just don't think about until you're implementing. So for example, two biggest issues with SKU Vault. Number one was just user interface. It's really difficult to navigate. It wasn't straightforward. Just finding a product and the bins that it was at, the bins that it was located in, and or like how much is in storage. Man, it took like 6 steps to find that a lot of times. So, like, the basic user interface was really difficult to navigate. That was the first thing that I noticed. But we again, back to this concept of toleration, we tolerated it. We were like, okay, it's all good, whatever. The second thing that I would say was our biggest issue was kits and bundles. So this is, again, if you are a kit or bundle heavy company, you need to dive into some of these complexities. So for us, kits, we did virtual stock. Virtual stock is the highest quantity component is the available inventory push to your channels. So in other words, it's instead of actual stock, like you have 27 in stock, all it's saying is, okay, in this kit, I have this and this, okay? And I have 10 of this and 2 of this. Well, I'm going to be pushing 2. So the lowest available of the components is what's pushed. I think I misspoke before, actually. Sorry. The lowest available amount of one of the components is what's pushed. So virtual stock, there's like a round trip. There's like a data round trip that happens because normally the sync, like it updates the virtual stock every 15 minutes. And then it gets pushed back to Shopify. So the problem that was happening with Qualtree is, man, this component was in 100 other kits. And, oh, by the way, we also sold this thing individually. So what would happen is we would get, especially like in busy seasons, we would get a bunch of sales, which would take, so a sale would come in, like 5 of these within 1 minute. And normally that goes to committed or like allocated or pending, some inventory systems call it, which depletes your available. So the problem with kits and bundles in system and virtual stock is we would oversell all the time. And that's the whole point of it. An inventory system is supposed to stop you from overselling, keep you in. It wasn't doing that. So we were just sitting there stuck. We kept overselling, and it was because how they did virtual stock, it wasn't fast enough for multi-channel e-commerce. And so after literally months of trying to fix it, we had an account manager. I hardly talked to him. Like, it was very difficult to get him on the phone. You have to schedule him a week out. He didn't really understand our ops. So I was calling into the call center all the time. And none of the people at the call center, they were really smart, but they weren't on the ground floor with inventory ops. They were just experts in SKU Vault and how to jerry-rig the system. They weren't operators that actually understood the problems I was running into. So again, bad user interface. Kits would not work correctly, or at least as we needed them to work. And then also wholesale. We had a totally separate wholesale business, and SKU Vault cannot consume that data in a compelling way. So we were just left sort of, it's just, the wholesale business was just this thing that happened in the corner. And we were just closing our eyes and like, I think we're going to do this much this year. And inventory wasn't really consumed really effectively. Like, you had to do I can't even remember the process at that time with SKU Vault. Like, you did a manual order in Shopify that went to ShipStation that you pushed to SKU Vault that you had to manually deduct. It was wild. And it never ended up getting done. It's just because like wholesale is only like 20% of our business, or like maybe even 10%. And yeah, for those 3 things, that's why I say like this conversation matters. Upmarket ERPs, they're too expensive. It's always going to be more than you think, and then you're going to get stuck. So if when new tech comes out that can effectively service you the way you want to be serviced, sorry guys, you're stuck. That's a hard contract to get out of with NetSuite. Then on the downmarket side, you're like, okay, it can do these 3 things. They're saying they can do numbers 4 and 5. I'm not sure. Let's find it out. Well, guess what? At Qualtree, that was like 6 months of time wasted just to figure out like, oh yeah, they can't service us. All of that to say, back-end systems matter. It's the difference between spiraling out of business or just totally stagnating, staying at $15 million a year, or actually achieving your full potential as a brand. I sincerely believe that an e-commerce company, their ability or inability to implement a system of record or a back-end system effectively is going to be the difference between them between them reaching their full potential or just stagnating, just kind of never getting past that phase. And I have a lot of empathy for them because I was there and I was in their shoes. It's like, how do you choose? You're in between a rock and a hard place. Do I choose the cheap thing that won't really serve me at the end of the day? Or do I choose the massive thing, massive commitment that could literally put me out of business if it's not implemented correctly and then I'm stuck? I get it, guys. Like, that sucks. And that's where Luminous comes in. We are the first system on the market that can give you a NetSuite-esque offering, meaning we come in and solve your problems. And we're not just a system, like this massive system that you customize for a lot of money. No, we were built in a certain way where we can handle your breadth of features that you need. And we were purpose-built for the modern brand, meaning whether your purchasing experience is with one person that also runs the warehouse, we were built for that. If you scale into a 5-person purchasing team, we can handle that as well. That works. But the ethos of our company, we are built for modern e-commerce. All those attributes I was talking about, wholesale arm, multiple channels, being able to link into your existing ecosystem, hands-on support, not just like an account manager you get to talk to every month. A system built for operators by operators. And we are here to help brands achieve their full potential. That's why I'm doing this. I sincerely believe Luminous, if we effectively solve this problem, we get to help thousands, hundreds of thousands of brands achieve their full potential. And it doesn't matter if your full potential is $1 million. That's great. I'd love to help you. It doesn't matter if your full potential is $90 million a year. Not every company in e-commerce is $1 billion exit. In fact, I would say like the beauty of e-commerce is you have the opportunity just to take off little pieces, little chunks of the market. And Luminous is the first system that our entire organization is built to serve you no matter what your ceiling is. Whether that's, like I said, whether it's $5 million it's your ceiling, or 50, or 100. We're here for it. You don't have to tell us that you're going to be $1 billion company for us to serve you. Like, we're here for it. So anyways, hopefully these ramblings were helpful to somebody. We'll see if we do another one of these solo podcasts. But yeah, thanks guys. And we'll see you next week. Bye.